My name is Rebecca Michael. I am the Advocacy Manager for the Independence Center, and I am here to talk to you about assistance animals. And I have two guests with me, and this is the Independence Center podcast. So I'm going to have the two guests introduce themselves, and then we will get started. So, Courtney?
Hi, I'm Courtney Stone, and I am the Senior Manager at the Independence Center.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elle Livingood, and I am the Community Advocacy Coordinator at the Independence Center.
What are your focus areas, Elle?
I focus on healthcare, disability awareness, and assistance animals.
So prime time for us to talk about assistant animals with you.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
I've been studying it extensively.
So you're going to give us all the details.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Maybe too many.
Okay, that's good to know. I'll kind of pull you back if you get a little too many details. All right, so let's talk about assistant animals in general, and then we'll break it down to the main two categories under assistant animals. So give me some information about what assistant animals are.
So assistance animals are there to support disabled people in different capacities.
Okay.
And underneath that, there's two different types.
Okay.
There are service animals, which support they provide a service to persons with disabilities. So they provide a specific task, such as like a guide dog for the blind or a hearing dog for the deaf. Or there's service animals for mobility disabilities, so like helping open a door or grabbing a pill bottle off the table or alerting someone to low blood sugar or a seizure, all sorts of different types. And that's under the service animals. And then we also have the emotional support animals, which provide support for the symptom of a disability and a lot of that more emotional support side for mental health disabilities.
Gotcha. Wow, there's a ton of different categories.
Absolutely. It's really cool to have so much support for all the different kinds of disabilities out there.
Yes. And so just to make sure that we are clear about when we reference the two different types of assistance animals. So we're going to refer to service animals versus emotional support animals. And sometimes those titles can get interchanged when speaking about the accessibility of having an animal. So as we're talking through this, let's make sure that we're very clear about the type of animal so that we're conveying that message properly so that
Absolutely.
Our listeners understand what type of animal we're referencing.
Yep.
Good deal. So Courtney, go ahead and tell us about the emotional support animals.
Yeah, I mean, I think Elle and I were chatting a bit outside that, you know, this is a hard topic because there are a lot of distinctions legally between what applies where and how. And so we'll be able to talk about this in our conversation, but we're also really excited to be updating our website at the Independence Center to be able to provide really clear information about what applies where. But it is with emotional support animals, it is interesting to recognize that people that have emotional support animals are often confused about that distinction between emotional support animals and service animals. So they may say that their emotional support animal is a service animal and think that the rules that apply to service animals apply to them. And unfortunately, that's a misunderstanding that happens really consistently and creates a lot of confusion and honestly nervousness around people that provide services in the public about how to both give access to people that have service animals, but also protect the health and safety of the other people in their facility and their space. With service animals, they have been specifically trained to perform a task. So they're providing a function that they were trained to do. It's not an inherent capacity of that animal. And so within that context, they're trained to be safe and to function well in public. And if that training isn't there, then you do a disservice both to people that need service animals and have that legitimate justification for that, but also you negatively impact sort of that view in the public of whether service animals are necessary and an important and beneficial function, which they absolutely are. It's incredible to see what animals can be trained to do and how much they can give access to someone that otherwise wouldn't be able to function out in the community. And that's that true distinction, is that are they providing a service that allows people that access, or is it a pet that someone is very legitimately connected to but has not been trained to maintain that connection in public in a safe way?
Sure. Sure. So there are a number of laws that govern these two types of assistance animals. And we also have a Colorado law that kind of provides some additional clarification as far as within the Colorado state. So let's talk about those federal laws and how they provide us some guidance about the assistance animals. So
Sure.
for service animals, what law are we referring to?
Service animals are covered under the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so because of that, you can, service animals are considered an accessibility device. We're trying to use the terminology accessibility role to be less objectifying of the animals. But it is very unique because it's a living creature that is also providing an accessibility role. And so keeping that in mind, it's not just, a hearing aid, which is an actual physical device, but this is a living, breathing creature as well. And so they are covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act and are allowed in all public spaces. Of course, there are going to be certain circumstances, right? You can't bring your service dog into an operating room because of that's just not safe type
their
of thing.
location, yes.
Exactly. But you can still bring them into most public spaces, and that is covered under the ADA.
So what animals are covered or allowed to be service animals?
Yes, so we use the term service animals. Primarily, they are dogs. However, in certain circumstances, you can have a miniature horse. And I was talking with somebody yesterday, and we were kind of just discussing how sometimes it seems like a miniature horse would be kind of ridiculous and unnecessary.
novelty.
Right, and why? And I was discussing with this person, they know an individual who uses a service animal as a miniature horse because they have balance issues. And the miniature horse being so big and being so stable can actually push up against that person's body and help to stabilize them from falling over, which was really fascinating. And seeing the functionality of why a horse over a dog. But keeping in mind that there are there are 4 questions that you have to be able to answer about your service horse if they're going to be allowed into public spaces.
What are those questions?
So one of the questions is it house trained?
Okay.
And then I can't remember all 4 of them off the top of my head, but it's basically, are they house trained? Is this going to provide an undue responsibility on the building itself, right? Because can they fit and just physical?
And they're much larger than a dog.
Exactly. And being able to go upstairs or something like that. And so the questions are formulated around that and just the public safety issue of it, because there is a difference physically between a horse and a dog. But they are allowed as assistance animals, as service animals in specific circumstances. But primarily they're going to be service dogs.
Gotcha. I was, I think we were probably in the same conversation that you referenced, because someone had brought up that they went out to a website where people take pictures of an individual while they're in a store, and they actually kind of made it a humorous picture of an individual with their service animal that was a miniature horse. And it really made me think about that education piece of this law.
Right.
And being able to have a miniature horse. It's not a novelty. It's really a assistant
There is
technology.
a specific purpose to
Correct.
being a horse instead of a dog. And
Right.
for some people, that's exactly what they need. And that is okay.
Yeah.
And just educating the public around that, because it's really not something humorous, and it's an accessibility tool, and people need this to be able to have access in the public.
Right.
And they're trained and they are legitimate.
Yeah. Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing to me.
Yeah.
I kind of thought about it at first, and it took me a second to go, okay, this isn't really funny. Mm-hmm. I see people laughing about it, but it really isn't.
Right. And
Something
the laughter
that's funny.
causes harm because it delegitimizes
Correct.
the role of that animal.
Yeah.
And it really also delegitimizes the partnership between the human and the animal. And
Yes.
it's a beautiful thing to see how animals can really thrive off of a service relationship and really come into their own and provide that for humans and really find satisfaction in it.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the length of time a service animal is providing a service before they retire and they transition into a pet. So what is kind of the general rule for a dog in a service relationship?
I think it would depend on if the dog is still able to continue providing the service. I know I've worked with the International Hearing Dog Inc., or I think it's Hearing Dog International. That's the way it's titled, Hearing Dog International. And they're based in Denver, actually. And they were talking about how they had trained a hearing dog for this one individual. And over time, the hearing dog actually became deaf himself.
Wow.
And so the woman got another hearing dog, and then the two dogs kind of partnered up together and would work together to provide the service, which was
that's
really
awesome.
fascinating because the dog still wanted to work, even though his role was as a hearing dog, but he was now deaf. And he still continued to partner with the dog that could hear and still provide that service. So it really just depends on if that animal is still able to provide the service to the individual, and keeping in mind animal rights and that this is a living creature and not abusing that role. But as long as they're still able to, then
Of course.
more power to them.
I thought it was really interesting. I got a piece of information because it does surprise people, the miniature horse category within service animals. But lifespan is another reason that miniature horses are a really beneficial tool. Is
Interesting.
That dogs live, depending 10 to 15ish years, but a horse can live up to 30 to 40 years.
Wow.
So if you're a person with a disability that knows that this service is something that will be important to you for the rest of your life, wouldn't you rather have one animal that you can train and expect to be with you for 30 to 40 years?
And really build that relationship.
Exactly, and have that consistency. So that's another interesting piece with the miniature horse context, was that the span of time that those services can be provided is really long with miniature horses. And granted, it's a little more complicated to navigate some of that, but that said, that's another dynamic of why people might choose that type of access.
That's really cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I had no idea that horses could live that long.
Yeah, either.
Way to
Me
go,
neither.
guys.
I'm just not an equestrian anything, so to expect me to understand and know how long a horse lives and understand that, I would have never have known that unless you brought that piece of information. And that's, if you think about it, that's a really good insight on why someone would choose that assistance animal. Yeah, makes sense to me.
I like that.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about emotional support animals. What law governs them?
So with emotional support animals, there are only a few places that you are legally allowed to use with your emotional support animal, and that is at the home, and that falls under the Fair Housing Act, which gives people with disabilities access within their homes to have their emotional support animal above and beyond like pet policies that might apply in apartments otherwise. So you can have your emotional support animal in your home. You can have it in the dorm. There are certain circumstances under the ADA where you can have your emotional support animal at work, as long as you have gone through the process of requesting a reasonable accommodation. So that said, that reasonable accommodation piece is really where things get a little more interesting ultimately, is that if you potentially are a person that has a cat as an emotional support animal that you can use within your home and have gone through the process to get that approved, and you wanted to bring your emotional support animal into work, that would still have to be a reasonable accommodation within your workplace. So if you worked in a kitchen, potentially, that would be unlikely to be a reasonable accommodation.
Yes.
Granted, it is case by case, and that's really the beautiful thing about reasonable accommodations in the workplace, is that it's intended to be a conversation with your employer, not a here's exactly what I need and you have to do this. It's a conversation about how you can best perform the job that you're required to do in a way that both acknowledges and accommodates your disability in the way that you choose. So I'm sorry, I'm getting off because there's so many distinctions.
totally valid, though.
I know, I'm like so many details.
Yes.
So the Fair Housing Act gives emotional support animals access within your home. The ADA can give access to emotional support animals at work. And then the Air Carrier Access Act gives access to you to have emotional support animals when you are on a plane or airline. And so there are some different distinctions when you're on a plane, and it depends on the airline. And so if you want to or have a desire to transport your emotional support animal on a plane, it is best to directly contact that airline to make sure that you understand their specific process and rules, because the Air Carrier Access Act is great because it does give the capacity for people to travel with something that allows them to do that they wouldn't otherwise.
Right, because on an airline, you'll be going for a longer period of time.
Right.
And still staying somewhere. And on that, under the Fair Housing Act, you can also have emotional support animals in hotels.
Thank you. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so that goes hand in hand with the Air Carrier Access Act, that you're going on a trip. You can take your emotional support animal on the plane and then house them also in your hotel so that you still maintain that accessibility role of your emotional support animal for yourself.
Mm-hmm. That said, emotional support animals are not generally allowed in public spaces because they have not been, again, specifically trained to perform that task in a way that would allow them to be safe around everybody else in the public. So that is kind of that distinction between emotional support animals, is that have they been specifically trained to perform a task? But we want to give access as much as possible within all of those different contexts.
And also, is that safe for the animal too, right? Because service animals are chosen not only for their training, but also for their personalities to match the task. And so if you have an emotional support animal that may be anxious outside of the house, is it really fair to that animal to take them and force that kind of situation on them if they are not comfortable with it, type of thing?
Well, and it's, one thing that pops up a lot in this conversation, I think just a misunderstanding about service animals and emotional support animals, is that there is not actually any sort of national recognized training for service animals or emotional support animals. So there's not like a certification or a piece of paperwork that you can say that says this is the standard to be a service animal. It is that they have been trained, but a lot of people think that if you have a service animal, maybe you need like some sort of proof that this is a service animal that's allowed, or you have to wear a vest, or you have to be visually distinguished as a service animal, and none of those are true. Really, it's that animal has been specifically trained to perform a task, and if the handler or the owner of that service animal, the user of it, decides to put a vest on that animal, they can, but it's not required. And I've actually heard from people that use service animals that when they do visually identify that service animal as a service animal, they feel more vulnerable, that they are more of a target. So if a person maybe is blind or visually impaired and their animal has a vest on, it almost feels, and this is a perspective, that it identifies them as someone who is a target. And so there's a little bit of context with why maybe people would choose not to visually identify their service animal as such. So it's a really interesting dynamic to sort of work through as far as what is going to allow someone access and also respect sort of their comfort with how they want to communicate with the world about their disability.
Right. I could totally see that, like, for myself, as a pretty small deaf woman, walking alone on the street feels very, I feel very vulnerable. And so if I had something that was identifying me as deaf, that would feel very uncomfortable. And like I am being targeted and kind of screaming that out to the world. Hey,
right.
I'm an easy target.
Hey, pick me again.
Right? Absolutely. So
Exactly.
I totally understand that. And on that, so can people just ask me, if I had a service animal, could people just ask me any question about my disability?
They cannot. There are some very specific questions that you can ask someone to identify whether or not it is a service animal or whether perhaps this person is misunderstanding sort of that distinction. So you can ask, is this animal specifically trained to perform a task? But you can't ask what that task is. You can ask, gosh, now I'm like blanking on, is this animal required due to a disability? And what task is it trained to perform? There you are.
You got it.
I know this.
It's amazing. There's two questions, and we find that we fumble through them.
Right.
Even though we say it a number of times a day when somebody asks us, or we get a phone call and say, I've had this interaction on a bus, and it became kind of tense, and just like an observer who just kind of watched the situation happen,
Right.
and just think, I want to advocate for him, or is this a correct interaction that I should have witnessed? And just kind of fumbling through those questions, which is actually, it sends us to our website. So on our website, we are in the middle of updating it, so bear with us. But it does detail those questions that you can ask about a service animal. There are some variations of those questions for emotional support animals that you can also find there as well. And then the laws that we've referenced, not only the ADA, but also the Fair Housing Act, and then the Air Carrier Act is important. But let's talk a little bit about the Colorado law that we have. What is the title of that law? Man, I threw you guys off. Come on.
The Colorado Assistance Animal Law. Haha.
Bingo.
Well, and that just came about last year, I believe, in January, that it was implemented. And it's an interesting context, and it specifically applies in our state. But it says that if you intentionally misrepresent your pet or emotional support animal as a service animal, you can be charged with a misdemeanor crime with varying levels of fines involved with that. And, it's just to call out that this topic is really confusing and stressful, really in a lot of different contexts for people in the public that don't necessarily know how to navigate these questions, and also for the people that want access and want to be able to interact with the world with their service animal. So, the Colorado Assistance Animal Law is addressing some of that fear that people may be intentionally misrepresenting their pet as a service animal, and that has so many negative impacts for the people that need that service animal in order to function in the world in the way that they choose. So as much as I can identify with the idea that you would prefer to be out in the world with your cat or whatever it is that makes you feel more comfortable, right, that has a negative impact on people that have service animals, and it does create tension really in the public about, there's more tension when people do have a service animal about, is that a real service animal? Are you just trying to bring, your dog that you love having around into the grocery store? And so it creates more hoops that people with disabilities have to jump through in order to get the access that they deserve.
Right,
Sure.
because it invalidates their need for these accessibility rules.
Right.
Sure. Yeah. So you can find this information on our website. You can go to www.theindependencecenter.org. You can search for assistance animals. I believe it is service animal is your tag words. There
For
is
now.
a couple of blogs that we have that have been written about this subject along with our website with some information. And then you can also call the Independence Center, and you can call us and ask for any of the advocacy staff, and we'll be able to link you to the person who can better answer these questions. And because we haven't really talked about this, I want to make sure that I touch on it a little bit. Because your one of your focus areas is assistance animals. And so if somebody calls you, is that going to be valuable for you?
If somebody calls me on the voice phone, I will not be able to talk to them because I am deaf.
Gotcha.
Yes.
So what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Through email.
Okay.
And so you can email me at elivengood@the-ic.org.
And how do you spell living good? Because I don't think it's spelled as you would say it phonetically.
Yes, it's LIVENGOOD. So just the E and then LIVENGOOD at the-ic.org. And so you can feel free to email me and I'll get back to you and we can figure out more information if you need assistance with that, and I can help in any way I can.
Gotcha.
And you can also visit theindependencecenter.org/community training and request a training specifically around service and assistance animals, so that if you have a group or you are in a business and want to figure out how to navigate that in a way that respects all parties involved, we would love to support you with that.
Yes, we are currently revamping that training and we're making it really awesome for the community, and we're going to have lots of information clarifying the two sides, making sure people know what their rights are and their responsibilities disabilities are around that. And so if you're a business and you're wondering about these things and what are your legal rights around that, please feel free to contact us and request that training so that we can give you that information.
Excellent. So before we close up, we didn't really talk about who you are. We talked about your titles and what you do at the Independence Center, but let's talk a little bit about who you are as people and how you got to the Independence Center. So Courtney, go ahead and start.
Oh, man. So I've been at the Independence Center for almost 6 years, and I started... Man, I feel so fortunate that I was given the opportunity to work here, because it has completely changed my perspective of who I am and what value I bring to the world, and has given me the space to develop my own confidence and skills in a way that I never expected from a job. Like, it is the most fulfilling place that I can imagine working at. So I started 6 years ago as our community organizer. I was our first, and then last year, or a couple of years ago, I took on the community organizing manager position as we sort of started to grow. And so a lot of my work has focused in the past with our political advocacy, which is where Becca is right now. And then last year, I took on our senior manager position. So I am supporting all 15 of our independent living programs with how we're providing services more broadly, and making sure that our staff are well supported by their managers, who are ideally well supported by me.
Yes, exactly. And we are. So I thank you for that. And Elle?
So I am the community advocacy coordinator, and it's essentially community organizing, but it's in much more of a advocacy role, and that's a huge passion of mine. I do it independently in my own life constantly. If you are a person with a disability, especially a low frequency type of disability, you are often expected to be representative of your entire group and educate everyone always.
Yes, that's true.
I have taken that role on with a passion. And so this is essentially my dream job, really, of working within a platform where I can really affect change and create better opportunities within the community for disabled people of all types.
Good deal. Well, as we expand out and create this training and more opportunities for providers to understand these laws, not only how they apply, but then also how they impact consumers, we'll definitely come back and have a conversation. But thank you both for sitting down and talking with me. I appreciate it. And hopefully people get some education out of this and come back for more. Thank you so much.